the scent of potpourri, films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly podcast that reviews one or two new release titles every episode with an occasional free-for-all segment at the end that we call Potpourri. You can find more of our work, including my written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to content at any of our tier levels on a recurring monthly subscription basis, or you can buy individual collections a la carte in the Patreon shop section. This week on the Patreon, I haven't really had much time to post anything on Patreon because this week I started a new job, and as is the case, even though the week has been all HR stuff and onboarding stuff, it's still a ton of information that I'm suddenly receiving in my day job. So it has been exhausting this week. So that's why I'm actually recording this Wednesday night at 11 p.m. So I'm going to record this and then post it and then go to bed and work tomorrow. So it's been a little bit hectic, but I'm sticking to the weekly schedule, and I will have more Patreon stuff coming down soon. Part 2 of my 4-part You Like It Darker by Stephen King review series is going to be coming soon. That's on the forefront, and I'm hoping that this weekend I can kind of decompress and watch a bunch of stuff and maybe throw up some immediate reaction reviews on Patreon. So again, that's at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. You can get access to that and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of exclusive episodes and a bunch of more content. That's at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media, which includes Letterboxd at obsessiveviewer. And later in the show, I'll be reviewing the new A24 film Tuesday, which opens in theaters this weekend. But before that, I'll be going over some movie news before I review Ishana Shyamalan's The Watchers in a non-spoiler and spoiler feature review. And it's just me tonight because I kind of had to scramble to get some scheduling time or recording time scheduled. So it's just me. Like I said, it's 11 o'clock the night before I release this episode. And then, so I'm just going to fly solo for this. And I'm hoping that I can maybe bank an episode or two the next couple of weeks. So that way I can kind of have that while I adjust more to my new job. So hopefully I'll be able to stick to this weekly schedule as I have been for the last 33 weeks, I think. But we'll see how it goes. We will see how it goes. So like I said, I'm going to be, covering a little bit of news, just bits and pieces here. There's nothing really major that I want to really talk about in the news before the review segment of the show, but I am going to share a couple of headlines and share some thoughts on that. But before I do that, once again, follow the show on social media and follow me at Obsessive Viewer. So news before the reviews. I have 3 headlines here that I want to talk about. One of them is fairly old. This was like a month ago. But Bloody Disgusting reported from, actually Deadline broke the news, but Bloody Disgusting ran it. Isn't It Scary? A rom-com, Isn't It Romantic getting a horror-themed sequel. Now, Isn't It Romantic, I think came out in 2019. Yeah, 2019. I remember Tiny and I went to a screening of that and then did I think what ended up being a full-length episode in the car reviewing Isn't It Romantic. And I might be thinking of another rom-com. But anyway, Isn't It Romantic? I was pretty impressed with it, or I was pretty pleased by it, because it is a good send-up of romantic comedy tropes, which I love, and it's something that I found pretty endearing, and it's hard for me not to find something like that that's poking fun at a genre that I love, endearing. So I was definitely the target audience for Isn't It Romantic, which starred Rebel Wilson, Liam Hemsworth, and Betty Gilpin. But this news is that there's a movie coming out called Isn't It Scary? It is going to be, I guess it's being promoted as a sequel to Isn't It Romantic? So I don't know if that means it's going to be in the same universe or what, but it is apparently going to be a send-up or a parody of horror movies. So let's see, no, our friends, maybe it's not, where there was something here. I don't know. Anyway, it's going to be about it's going to be about the same kind of thing, a meta look at horror movies and horror tropes. So Deadline said the sequel will take a similarly meta approach, riffing on the tropes of the horror genre. And you know, this particular news, I don't know. I guess I don't know. I feel like rom-coms are ripe for the plucking, so Isn't It Romantic worked for me in that respect, but I don't know if parodies and meta humor is really that in with the horror genre. I mean, there has been some good ones. There has been some good riffs on in terms of parodying horror and everything. Like even something like Bodies, 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 which isn't a straight up parody. It's more of a comedic horror bend toward like Gen Z. And that's all well and good. That's really fun. That's really entertaining. But this feels like it's more in league with like the Scary Movie franchise, which I don't have any problem with, but I don't know if this really is something that I am all that interested in, to be completely honest. So I don't know. We'll see. It could be good. I don't know when it'll take off and actually be, a thing. But I don't know. I'll keep an open mind. We'll see. Because when we have like Christopher Landon has been doing some really good stuff with horror, like the like Freaky and Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You. Those are really fun, energetic horror movies that are horror comedies. And when you push that, like when you have someone doing something so well in that realm, which I'm also very much still sad that we're not going to get to see his version of Scream 7, but when you have something that when you have someone working in the horror genre like Christopher Landon, who has his finger on the pulse of the genre and knows how to navigate it in a comedic way and sending very much parodying certain setups and everything through this comedic horror lens, it makes me hesitant to be excited about something that's a straight up parody of the horror genre, because I don't know. I don't know if it really can work anymore, but I'll eat my words when it comes out and it's awesome, I guess. So that's the first piece of news. I have a link in the show notes. Show notes, of course, are at obsessiveviewer.com/OV432. The next piece of news I am very much not excited about, which you'll see why. Rebel Moon. Zack Snyder's director's cuts are set to release on Netflix in late summer. So the other day, Zack Snyder unveiled that his Rebel Moon director's cuts are going to be released on Netflix on August 2nd, and they're going to be retitled. So Rebel Moon Part 1 is now Rebel Moon Chapter 1, Chalice of Blood, and Rebel Moon Chapter 2, Curse of Forgiveness. They're both going to be on August 2nd. I could not care any less about this. I don't even know why I brought it up in this episode. I really probably shouldn't have. I should just let it just die. I never watched the second one, part 2, because I was so not even disappointed. I expected it to be shitty, but I was so disenchanted by the first one and kind of heartbroken because it is a very just bland, cookie cutter, dumb shit remake of my favorite movie, Seven Samurai. And it lacked any nuance whatsoever. So I can't imagine his stupid cash-in director's cuts are going to be any improvement over it, because he's a man who just doesn't understand the fucking medium that he's working in. He is the dumbest person behind the camera that I can think of. So I don't know. Rebel Moon, I won't be seeing him. I don't care. So yeah. And then to round out the news before the reviews, here's something I'm a little bit more eager or more interested in, but also it does have a little bit of a caveat to it. There is, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast before, because this was announced weeks and weeks ago, but Peacock has ordered a straight to series order for a not remake or anything, but it's a new series set in the universe of The Office. I think that it's rumored to be called The Paper. I don't know if that's been confirmed yet or not, but basically recently Steve Carell was on a late night talk show. I can't remember, but he talked about how Donald Gleason had reached out to him to ask about The Office and said, like, hey, am I making a mistake if I take this role? Because I guess Donald Gleason is going to be on the new show. So I guess he's going to star in it, and he's going to star in it with an actress named Sabrina Impacciatori from The White Lotus season 2. So it's going to be Donald Gleason and her, and of course a cast of characters. So Steve Carell had just talked about it a little bit and said that he spoke highly of Donald Gleason and everything. But the article goes on to say that Peacock has teased at the show's premise, saying that, quote, the documentary crew that immortalized Dunder Mifflin's Scranton branch is in search of a new subject when they discover a dying historic Midwestern newspaper and the publisher trying to revive it with volunteer reporters. Now, I don't remember if we talked about this on the podcast, so I apologize if this is going to be already covered territory on the show. But I am cautiously interested in this. Like I said, I think the rumor is that it's going to be called The Paper, which I think is fun. That's really fun, just given the premise of it being about a newspaper, and it's in the Office universe. So just like the kind of not double entendre, but the double meaning of like the paper, and it's, that evokes the thought of Dunder Mifflin paper. My kind of issue with this, not issue, but the thing that makes me think that it might not be quite that innovative or interesting, and therefore might kind of crash and burn a little bit, as much as I wouldn't like to see that, is the very premise of it. So, like I said before, the premise is it's going to be set at a Midwestern newspaper that's failing, that's dying, and a publisher who's trying to revive it with volunteer reporters. Now, that basic premise is really interesting in terms, like on paper, no pun intended, but it's really interesting on paper because we're in a time where, obviously like the newspaper industry has been failing for years, for decades, it seems, but we're also in a point where news is politicized and news is altered to the point where there's no trust among people with it, and there's just like we're in a time where the news industry, the newspaper industry, the news organizations that run the newspapers and run the news industry and everything are basically in stiff competition with social media, which is creating this bubble for people to receive the news that they can find. And in that bubble, they get very much locked into certain ideals, certain ideas, certain demonstrably false news pieces, because they're being they're being collated and they're being fed this information through social media. But anyway, I'm getting way far away from this whole premise. But basically, we're in a time where it is kind of interesting, the thought that we could see a show that is based around the newspaper industry at this time, at this point, at this current day point. The hesitation, the issue, and what doesn't make me that excited about this is that Parks and Rec exists. And if Parks and Rec didn't exist, I feel like I would be much more interested in this show that I'm going to just be referring to as The Paper. And the reason for that is that I feel like this has potential to be about a community and about like the bigger picture of the people in this community that revolve around this newspaper, that intersect with people that are involved in this newspaper. The premise alone feels like it could be a good kind of canvas for an eclectic small town group, small town community as it intersects with the newspaper. And the reason that I'm not that excited about it is, like I said, Parks and Rec exists. Pawnee, Indiana is its own ecosystem. It's its own thing. And it's its own entity. And the way that Parks and Rec worked so well, Parks and Rec was incredible at figuring out how to satirize and how to parody like small town municipal bureaucracy and government, small town government, in doing that through like the lens of Leslie Knope, who is passionate about government and wants to make a difference, and having her be basically surrounded by people who don't take it as seriously as her, in a community that is filled with eclectic, weird, bizarre people. That was this perfect recipe for incredible, like, just developing this ecosystem of Pawnee, Indiana. And I feel like the log line for this new show, The Paper, the log line for it just feels like it is maybe potentially going to just be a rehash of that central concept for Parks and Rec, but instead of small town municipal, small like municipal government, it's a newspaper. And I mean, there are ways that they can make that innovative and unique and interesting, but I think that it being in the universe of The Office is going to be secondary. It is may not even be something that is considered when it premieres and when it is airing. Instead, it's going to draw. I feel like it is likely going to draw comparisons to Parks and Rec, and I think that is what's going to keep it from potentially being a breakout hit, or potentially being something that would be considered a success, because I think that it's going to be drawing so many comparisons to Parks and Rec, and that I just feel like Parks and Rec did that exact type of storytelling, that exact type of story so well that it's going to suffer for it. So we'll see what happens. I'll check it out for sure, but we'll see what happens. And yeah, I don't know. We'll see. So that's all the news that I have. Before I get to the reviews for the evening, let me know what you think about these pieces of news. Of course, you can email me, matt@obsessiveviewer.com. Or you can message me on all the social medias. I'm trying to be a little bit more active on Threads, so hang out with me over there at Obsessive Viewer, of course. So that's all the news I have. Let's go into the featured review of the evening. I'm going to be talking about Ishana Shyamalan's directorial debut, The Watchers, which is currently in theaters. It opened in theaters on June 7th. And of course, I'm going to do a non-spoiler review before I go into a spoiler section later in the review. I will have that divided up by timestamps in the show notes of the episode. And before I get into spoilers, I'll play a clip from the trailer so that you guys can be ready for it, basically. So here we go. Non-spoiler thoughts for the watchers. The premise of this movie, of course, is, according to IMDb, is a young artist gets stranded in an extensive, immaculate forest in Western Ireland where, after finding shelter, she becomes trapped alongside 3 strangers stalked by mysterious creatures each night. The movie was written and directed by Ishana Shyamalan, who is the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan, and the script was adapted from a novel of the same name, I believe, written by A.M. Shine. And the cast includes Dakota Fanning, Georgina Campbell, Olwen Foray, Oliver Finnegan, Alistair Brammer, and John Lynch. So, in non-spoiler thoughts, I really didn't like this movie. I was pretty disappointed with it, but let me go back and talk a little bit about my expectations for this, because I saw the trailers for this and I was pretty intrigued by it. I was pretty interested in it. More so, I really liked the idea of, and this is purely superficial, but I'm someone who is on record as saying that I want good things for M. Night Shyamalan. He does not always hit the mark. I would argue that maybe he doesn't hit the mark more than he actually hits the mark, but anytime I see one of his movies, I want to root for the guy, because I really have a deep appreciation for him because of like his early work, and I want him to succeed with these weird, interesting plots that he does. And so, knowing that his daughter had a movie coming out this summer, and that he has a movie coming out this summer, I wanted this to be like Shyamalan summer, because I wanted both of these movies to succeed. Now, M. Night Shyamalan's movie Trap is not coming out for until like next month, I think, or maybe early August. I'm not sure, but so that remains to be seen. But unfortunately, The Watchers didn't really inspire a lot of confidence in me with in terms of Ishana Shyamalan's talent, I guess, if that's too harsh to say. So let me get into my actual non-spoiler thoughts. So every time I'd see the trailer for The Watchers, I'd be a little bit more intrigued, a little bit more excited for it, specifically because this is an intriguing premise. It's a premise about these weird creatures in the middle of the forest who have basically caught these people in this room and they observe them. And that's what the main trailer really highlighted, was that they are and also the title very much implies it. They, like the main characters, the human characters in this movie, are the performers for an audience of whatever kind of beings are in the woods. And in that respect, this movie follows a lot of the same structures and pitfalls of M. Night Shyamalan's work. And I'm gonna try my best to stray away from direct comparisons to M. Night Shyamalan, because this is not M. Night Shyamalan. He helped produce the movie, but this is Ishana Shyamalan's directorial debut, and it's an adaptation from a novel. So I can't really say that, oh yeah, M. Night Shyamalan has his fingerprints all over this, because I don't know what his involvement was with the production, and it doesn't matter, because this is not his movie. This is Ishana Shyamalan's movie. So having said that, there is a lot of there's a fair amount of potential here. I think that there is this really interesting and relatively effective kind of focus on less is more. And in that, like, there are some sequences where we don't see the creatures themselves, but we do see like things like silhouettes, and we see some interesting camera angles that really highlight the fear that these creatures can bring out without really showing us detailed representations of what these creatures are, which I'm all for. I think that in frankly, in a better executed movie, I feel like those aspects, those flourishes of filmmaking would go a long way, because they would go a long way to set the atmosphere, to set the tone, and to really help amplify the tension. The problem that I had with The Watchers overall is that it doesn't really feel like it doesn't feel like the storyteller at the helm of this thing is very confident in the story that they're telling. And I don't want that to sound like it's, this big negative thing, because I do think that there is quite a bit of potential with Ishana Shyamalan with this movie, but there is this lack of control over the narrative that I felt was pretty much evident throughout the entire movie. And one of the big things one of the big indicators of that is this, the way that the movie really doesn't give the characters or the characterization of those characters room to really breathe. So Dakota Fanning plays a woman by the name of Mina. I don't even remember really what her whole deal is in terms of her professional life. Like, she works at a shop, I think. I don't remember, but she has this bird, and it's a whole thing. She's supposed to take the bird somewhere, and then that's when the car breaks down, and that's when she finds the place in the woods. That's basically the setup. But the problem is that whole setup, as foggy as it is to me now, after having seen it, I think I saw this like a week ago. As foggy as that is to me now, there's not a lot of character development in those sequences. Like, there's a part in the trailer where she basically puts on like a wig and kind of disguises herself and goes out and actually has like a little bit of a social life. And it's something that's slightly peculiar. And she kind of talks to the bird and saying, like, I know you don't like when I do this, but it's something I do to blow off steam or something. And like, now, being removed from the movie, I'm kind of wondering, like, what was the point of that? I understand on the surface level, given what we are given about her backstory, which if I remember, I'll talk about in spoilers, but it just felt very hollow. It felt very hollow. It felt like, oh, we need to demonstrate that this woman has this thing in her past. We need to demonstrate that not only does she have this thing in her past, she's still healing from it. She's still carrying the weight of it in her. So we're going to have this one-off scene involving her going out at night and then talking to a bird about it. And then that'll be what we get in terms of setting up her backstory and what her mental state is going into this bizarre situation she finds herself in. And that's just not good enough. Like, it feels like somewhat like checking things off a list so that we have this the groundwork for her emotional development throughout the movie. But it's still a check mark. It's still a checklist. It's still something that really is not developed enough, is not detailed enough to really make us latch onto the character. And when you have this character then be thrust into this supernatural, otherworldly situation that has all of these rules built into it, you kind of forget about the backstory. You kind of forget about the kind of deep-seated stuff that she's dealing with, because it's also contending with setting up the history of these characters, the history of these creatures, the history of like what went on and why they're there, and the mystery surrounding all of that. So that when you have all of this information, all of these things coming to light, you forget that, old Mina has some things in her past. Mina has stuff that she's dealing with. You kind of forget about that because you have to catch up and you have to be like, okay, so they can't go out after nightfall because that's when the creatures come out. They can't escape the woods because there's not enough time in the day to get to where they need to go. And it's just like all of these, like this very rigid set of rules that feed off of just setting up the central concept. is a drag. Like, here's the thing. I had initially planned to do a double feature because so this movie came out last week. I had most of the week off from work because I was leaving. My last day at my previous job was on Tuesday, and I had the rest of the week just to do my own thing until my new job started this week. So I went to see this on Thursday, last Thursday, and my intention was like, oh, I'm going to see this, and then I'll see Bad Boys Ride or Die immediately after. I'll do a double feature. I have a whole thing planned, and that's what I'm going to do. And so when I got to my seat with the watchers, I got so drowsy, like in just trying to keep up with the exposition, trying to keep up with the backstory. I was so disengaged by it that by the end of the movie, I was like, I will fall asleep during Bad Boys. I will not be able to stay awake. So I'm just going to see that at a later date. And yeah, because this was a struggle. And like, the performances are fine. The performances are probably a little bit better than the performances in most of M. Night Shyamalan's weaker movies. So I do think that Shyamalan does have a little bit of flair for getting decent performances out of her actors, but I can't really point to anything in particular that really stood out in terms of acting. So that's a pretty weak, I don't know, a pretty weak praise to give to her, because even with this movie having a handful of characters, it reaches a point where, and I'll talk a little bit more in spoilers about this if I remember, of course, but it reaches a point where when we get to the third act, when we get to the point in the movie where things pivot, and then we're like, it's like the lead up to the climax of the movie, I hadn't been paying attention to the time. I had not been paying attention to how much time was left, how much time I'd been in my seat. I had been just focusing on staying awake throughout this damn movie. When it reaches that point where it's pivoting to the third act, essentially, where it's basically changing up the plot so that we can get to the climax of the movie, I was so convinced, given how just drab and not cookie cutter, but as drab and like not compelling as the rest of the movie had been up to that point, I was under the assumption that we were in the climax of the movie. I was sitting there thinking like, oh man, I'm going to have like, okay, this is actually finishing up earlier than I thought. Okay. And it wasn't like when we get to the point where I started thinking like, is this the end of the movie? It wasn't a situation where it's like, oh my God, so many things are happening. I'm so excited. I can't believe we're already at the end of the movie. It was more like, the energy of this movie has been so low throughout it that the things that are happening on screen right now feel like they are the concluding points of this entire story. And that's a bit of a drag because I'm not invested in it, so I can't get that excitement, or I don't feel like the characters are in as much peril as they are because I don't feel that energy coming through on screen. And the second thing is, like, the other downside of that is, fuck, I also have 20 more minutes left of this movie, so I need to stay awake for another 20 minutes in my seat. In those last 20 minutes, it is, like I will say, it is a very strong pivot. It is a very big pivot to the kind of climax of the story, but it's also not that interesting. It is not that interesting, and I don't know anything about the novel that it's based on. I don't know what kind of creative liberties were taken with the story from the novel. I don't know how exact it is or anything, but this plot is so just unimaginative and derivative of other things that I feel like there was such an emphasis on, how to say it without spoiling it. There is such an emphasis on the barest points of the characters, like the barest checkpoints. Like Dakota Fanning's character, she's dealing with trauma from the past. Georgina Campbell's character is dealing with trauma from the more recent past, and other characters are dealing with other things. And it's like we are just given the barest of that, the barest minimum of those character traits. And so when those character traits, when those issues come to light in their current predicament, in this like weird stage that they're on, when those come to light, it isn't that interesting because we don't have a lot of context for it, because we just get the barest information. Like Georgina Campbell lost someone. Dakota Fanning lost someone when she was younger. And like there's certain levels of characterization and more importantly, guilt that is hinted at in this story, that is hinted at in this movie, but is not explored past being hinted at. And that's the problem. That's the main overall problem for me with The Watchers, is that while I did mention that it is extremely derivative of other stories that have been done incredibly, like much better than this, while it is derivative of that, I don't fault the movie for being derivative. I don't fault the movie for reminding me of other movies of a bigger caliber from bigger filmmakers in the relatively recent past. I don't fault it for that. I fault this movie for not doing anything interesting with the characters. Like, if it had been derivative of the one movie that I drew the most comparisons to, if it had been derivative of that in the plot, as it is in the finished product, but used that derivative plot to tell a story about a character or tell something with a little bit more meaning to it, I would have been much more forgiving of it being derivative. I would have been much more forgiving of it being not very unique or inventive on that part, because I know that deep down, the story being told is the story of the characters, is the story, like there is deeper meaning to be mined from genre movies and really every movie. And it is the bigger, the thing to mine, the character stuff that is being mined is the prevailing thing about the story and the movie. The problem with this is that they don't mine that deep. Like, it is very much completely below the surface level, and it's not that interesting. And they don't do anything compelling with the characters, with the character growth, with anything. It just feels very derivative and unimaginative. And that's really the biggest bummer for me with the movie. And because derivative as it is a pretty intriguing and compelling premise on the surface. And I just wish that there was more to it. I wish that there was more character depth and even more character conflict between them. Like, we go through all of the motions of what you would expect from this particular type of cast of characters in their predicament that they find themselves in. And here's the thing, like, it actually reminds me a lot of the Twilight Zone episode 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. Like, it is extremely similar to that and a couple other Twilight Zone episodes. But it does remind me of 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. And a lot of that episode is about these characters coming to terms with who they are, what they are, like becoming this like level of sentience or self-realization and dealing with the ramifications of what they are. Like, they don't know what they are, but they think that maybe they're not loved and that's why they're being punished. That's why they're there. There's a lot of existential dread and a lot of really good character stuff in that 22-minute episode of a television show from 1962 or 3. Here we have, I think, 4 characters in Search of an Exit and 4 characters that don't deal with like the existential dread. They don't deal with any kind of existential threat. Instead, they're discovering things, and they have to go through the motions of these big dramatic moments involving the creatures. And it's like, just wait a beat. Just give me one moment where these characters are dealing with like the existential threat that they face in their own personal experience, rather than have us just go to the next bit of exposition, the next dump of information, to lead to a pretty unsatisfying conclusion at the end of the movie that came like 20 minutes too late anyway. Yeah, I just wish there was a little bit more time to develop the characters and develop what they're doing. In fact, there is, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that because it's a spoiler. So I could probably dive into spoilers here in just a moment, but overall thoughts on The Watchers, I just feel like there wasn't enough substance to it. There wasn't enough characterization. There wasn't enough intrigue even on the plot, which is so disappointing to me because I was really, I was looking forward to this movie. And when I was in it, it just felt like a drag. Like, it was not... The information that was being delivered to me in the movie was not information that was being delivered in a satisfactory manner that held my attention. So that's the runaround way that I can talk about it without spoiling it. So I'm going to go into spoilers for The Watchers. I ended up rating this 2 stars on Letterboxd, and yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go into spoilers for The Watchers. I'm going to play a clip from the trailer. When I come back, I'm going to be spoiling it. If you don't want to be spoiled on this movie, turn this off or skip to the secondary review link. Timestamps are in the show notes of the episode. And all right, I'm going to go into spoilers for The Watchers after this clip from the trailer.
What is happening? What is this place?
I don't mean to scare you, but we haven't much time. It's not wise to keep them waiting. They'll be very interested in someone new.
It's a window on the other side. They come every night.
And they watch us.
What is that? What are they doing?
Applause. For you, Mina.
How long have you been here?
I don't know.
And you've never seen one.
No one sees one and survives.
They have come to our world for a reason.
I'm not supposed to be here. And I'm not staying here.
They allow us to live because we follow their rules.
All right, so spoilers on for The Watchers. Oh boy. Okay, so it is very much reminiscent of Us from Jordan Peele. That's where I felt like it was being very derivative. Again, I don't really fault it for that, mostly because I don't know anything about the backstory of the book. I don't know anything about the plot of the book, how much of that is from the book, or when it is, like, in terms of dating, like what came first, Us or this. And Us is even a movie that was inspired by, like, an episode of The Twilight Zone. He took a lot of inspiration from oh my god, why can't I think of the name of that episode? I don't know, it was a season 1 episode, the one in the bus station. But anyway, listening to that clip from the trailer, I forgot like there were elements of it that I'd kind of forgotten about. But the big thing that I really want to talk about in spoilers, so a couple of big things I want to talk about in spoilers, is the backstory of Mina. If I remember correctly, her whole grief thing is that she was kind of I don't know how to describe it, a very contrarian child, I guess. She was very outspoken, or very much a kind of bratty kid who didn't want to listen to her mother. And because of that, there was one pivotal event where she was angry, or she was acting out, and ended up indirectly causing the car accident that killed her mother. And that eventually led to her kind of going, like, not being in contact with her sister. I think they were twins. I don't know. It's very it's very muddy because, again, we are given the bare minimum of this, and then it kind of goes back, and throughout the movie, we're giving like little tiny breadcrumbs that are that are in contention with the additional backstory we get, like the whole thing with the underground lab bunker thing, and the doctor, and the realization that they are mimicking, like that these creatures are just mimicking humans so that they can, I guess, be like they're demons, I guess. I don't freaking know. They're whatever. They mimic human behavior. It also reminded me a lot of Annihilation in that respect, but they mimic them to take over human lives, basically. And, that's all well and good, but it's also pretty derivative. It's pretty much not told in any compelling way. And that was the most frustrating thing about this entire movie, is that it had laid the groundwork to really explore in an interesting way some elements of it in relation to grief. Let's see. So, Sierra, Georgina Campbell's character, her husband dies at the beginning of the movie. And then late in the movie, Dakota Fanning finds, they all find the underground lab, the video recordings of the doctor. I think that was Kilmartin. And he's giving all of this exposition through these videos saying that, like, yeah, they mimic human beings. Like, I can use this to resurrect a human life. And it turns out that the resurrected human life is Madeline. And she's actually one of the Watchers the whole time. And it's very, like, I wouldn't even say that that's a very Shyamalan sort of twist at all, because it's not really presented that way per se. It's not that direct. But the biggest frustration that I have with this is that late in the movie, they are demonstrating to us that these characters who have lost people, that they've lost people and are dealing with that grief. Like, I wish that the movie would have explored them, at least one of them, either Sierra or Mina, dealing with the pull toward using what they know, using these notes to figure out if they can resurrect their loved one. If Mina could resurrect her mother, if Sierra could resurrect her husband. Instead, the movie deals with, like, Sierra's husband dying and then just regurgitates that through Daniel's death, after it's established that Daniel and Sierra have, like, a kind of romantic chemistry. And, like, when the beginning of the movie shows Sierra's husband being killed, and then by the end of the movie, we just see her having, like, her boyfriend killed, like, I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunity between those two things. And that was another thing that really, really bugged me about the movie, was that there's such a weird time jump where they're there for months, it seems, and, like, it just feels like, why do that and not, like, develop the characters, not use, like, if you're just going to jump in time, like, why not, jump in time after you've actually developed the characters a little bit? I don't know. Maybe I'm not making sense, but that bugged me a little bit, too. And, Olwen Fiorer, I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name. I'm so sorry. But Madeline, her character, that was frustrating as well, because while I didn't see it coming that she was one of the Watchers and that she was resurrected or whatever, she was used to mimic Kilmartin's father or wife, dead wife. Like, I don't know if that, like, I didn't see that coming because I wasn't that invested in the movie. But once it, before that kind of crystallized, before that kind of became the thing about the movie, before that moment, it really felt like the most just basic screenwriting for Madeline's character. Like, she is the keeper of all the secrets. She's the keeper of all of the rules for the Watchers, and she's the one that's giving, like, she's the seasoned person who is taking care of everyone. And she has these moments where she's like, I was supposed to take care of them, or like, I think she has that regret. But she's also like, at opportune moments in the movie, she's like, oh yeah, we should be doing this because of this. It's like, yeah, you're just a vessel for plot. Like, you're not giving us anything that, you know, we don't need, that gives further context for the character. It's just like, oh, by the way, this is the reason why this is the way that it is, and this is why we should do it this way. And it just feels very hollow and empty. Even when, like, Daniel, I think it's Daniel, attacks her, it just feels very, not performative, but it feels very just hollow and empty. It feels very much like it's supposed to be like the release of tension for that moment, but instead it's just like, oh, what the hell? He's attacking? Okay, whatever. It just feels very hollow and empty again. So it just did not sit well with me at all. And I'm trying to think of anything else, because I know that there was a lot of stuff that really annoyed me about the movie. But really, at the end of the day, it just didn't satisfy me. It didn't really give me anything to really latch onto. And again, I think that Ishana Shyamalan does have some promise in terms of her filmmaking techniques, her style of doing like less is more, because there are some really interesting shots of these creatures that utilizes this less is more approach to it, because we see like the outlines, we see the silhouettes, and it's not done in a way that's like, oh, you can't see what these creatures look like. It's more like you can only see parts of what these creatures look like, so that your imagination can kind of fill in the blanks, or you can see silhouettes, so you can get the implication of what these monsters look like. Like, that's really cool, effective filmmaking. That does feel like it is a page out of her father's book. That, like, M. Night Shyamalan is really good at that part of the filmmaking process. He and I'm afraid Ishana Shyamalan don't seem like they are the greatest at scripting and actual laying out the story that they're telling. And I think that there is tons of potential for Ishana Shyamalan to really hone her craft and improve going forward. I only see the potential here. I see too many blemishes for this to be a really positive review, really. So then the movie ends with, like, again, that climax where that happens like way too late, it feels, in the movie. And we get the realization that Madeline is one of the Watchers, and that she's been mimicking Madeline, who is the dead wife of Kilmartin, and there's a whole thing. But by the end, that final showdown just seems very, very cookie cutter again. It feels very much like it's supposed to be paying off the grief and the trauma of Sierra and Mina, but there's not enough information, and there's not enough detail for those characters and the characterizations of those characters to really bring us a cathartic moment at the end, a cathartic conclusion to their stories. And it just feels very empty. And then the weird end where it's like, I think she's still out there, and Madeline still watches over me, and we see the weird kind of dumb ending with the child looking at the camera. It's like, okay, it didn't work for me, because I wasn't invested in the story to have a good a good experience with the end of the movie in that final scene. So I think I've kind of run out of things to say about The Watchers. It is in theaters now, so check it out if you want to. Suffice it to say, I'm pretty disappointed in it, and I think that while Ishana Shyamalan does show quite a bit of potential with her filmmaking, this is just not there's a lot of promise, but there's not a lot of good things to say about The Watchers. I really was not a big fan of it. So unfortunately, it's a negative review. Again, it's in trailers. It's in theaters. Let me know what you thought of it, matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And yeah, that's my review. And I'm going to go ahead and go into the secondary review of the evening. It's going to be a probably non-spoiler review of Tuesday. But I'm actually going to play, because I'm so not confused, but I'm so conflicted on when to play the stinger and when to play the trailer. So let me go ahead and just bring us into the secondary review. Here's a stinger to whet your appetite for it, I guess. So here we go. Going into the secondary review of the evening.
They tell me I view obsessively.
And of course, before we get to our secondary review, that's why I was so conflicted by it, because I'm saying we're going into it. But before we go into it, I want to take a quick moment to remind you guys that if you like the show, please take a moment to follow us on social media and subscribe to and rate the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or whatever your preferred podcast app is. And don't forget to subscribe to the Obsessive Viewer Podcast's YouTube channel as well, where I post some videos here and there and live streams of podcasts. And finally, if you are interested in starting a podcast of your own, you can go to Libsyn and use the promo code OBSESS. When you sign up for a new account, you can get up to 2 months free, depending on when you sign up during the month, and we will get a commission on it as well. Check the show notes for more details on that. Once again, as of next week, I will have been using Libsyn for 11 years on the dot and have never had a single problem with them to host the podcast on. So check that out. If you want to start your own podcast, use promo code OBSESS at Libsyn. And now back to the show. And once again, I'm going to be doing a non-spoiler review of Tuesday, the new A24 movie that is in theaters this weekend. And to bring us into that non-spoiler review, I'm going to play a clip from the trailer for Tuesday.
I just don't think you understand how Tinder works.
Can I tell you something? I know exactly how Tinder works.
Then
I
you
do.
don't understand how flirting works.
How do you think you got here?
It hurts.
Where, honey?
Everywhere.
All right, and so here we go. Secondary review of the night. Tuesday is in theaters this weekend. It is playing at, if you're here in Indy, it's playing at Keystone Art, Living Room Theaters, and a couple of AMC's and Regal Theaters here in Indy. The premise, according to IMDb, is a mother and her teenage daughter must confront death when it arrives in the form of an astonishing talking bird. Writer and director for this movie, making her feature directorial debut, much like Ishana Shyamalan, is Dana Oniunis Pusick, and the cast includes Arinze Keene, Lola Pettigrew, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and Leah Harvey. So here's the thing. I knew nothing about Tuesday going into it. So when the movie begins with a bird that is going around the world, basically killing people or being there in people's final moments as they are about to die, I was very much gobsmacked with confusion, really. I was like, what did I just get myself into? This is a very weird premise. And on the surface, I actually really like the premise of the movie. I really like this idea of personifying the specter of death as this bird that is able to communicate and just like grow and take up space in all of its scenes. I really like that, and I think that that's a really intriguing concept, especially with a story like this that is dealing with grief and impending grief and not really being able to to accept what is going to happen, what is in the process of happening. There's some really hefty, interesting themes that are explored in this. Unfortunately, the movie's really weird and disjointed, and it didn't really have a big, long-lasting effect on me. I say that I finished watching it a couple of hours ago. I'm sorry, but it didn't really speak to me the way that these types of movies definitely speak to me. I am a huge fan of this type of movies that deal with people that are dealing with grief or dealing with hardships and dealing with things that are out of their control as human beings. I am all for this type of story. And while there are certain things in this movie that work pretty well, Julia Louis-Dreyfus in particular does a pretty good job just conveying this mother who is trying to get away from, not even get away from the responsibility of dealing with her dying daughter, but she's trying to get away from confronting the fact that her daughter is about to die. And that's a really interesting place to be in for the character and the characters in this movie, because the daughter, played by Lola Pettigrew, her name is Tuesday. That's why the movie's called Tuesday. She's kind of over that, and she kind of calls Julia Louis-Dreyfus out on that. And those moments are really pretty solid in terms of dealing with this family issue of like trying to navigate this very tragic and impending tragic moment in these two people's lives. So we have a mother who is trying to who is running away from the fact that her daughter likely does not have a lot of time left. And then you have a daughter who feels neglected by her mother as her mother is going away, as her mother is trying to flee this idea of dealing with the impending death of her daughter. And so you have this multifaceted kind of level of grief and drama. And then you throw in this talking bird that is really, again, on the surface, it's like on paper, in theory, it's a compelling, interesting idea, especially for like A24, which, by the way, I know that several weeks ago, I was in the habit of referring to A24 as A24. I've corrected myself now, so all the film bros can put their pitchforks down. But anyway, there's a quirkiness to it that feels somewhat at home in like an A24 movie. And quirkiness is maybe not the right term, because it's not necessarily that quirky. It's more a vessel, like the concept of the bird being like the Grim Reaper essentially is played up as just a vessel for dealing with the grief and the loss that is to come, and the pain of losing a loved one, and using the impending loss of that loved one as something that just destroys your entire life and creates this just wallowing pit of grief when it hasn't even occurred yet. Like, there's some really interesting character stuff here, and the inclusion of a giant talking bird to deal with that it wears out its welcome. Well, it doesn't even wear out its welcome, because things happen that kind of cause it to change around a little bit. I'm not going to go into details because I'm not going to go into spoilers, but suffice it to say, there are elements to this movie that I feel are a little bit underserved, because we get the introduction of this bird, and then we get the actions of the characters that results in bigger picture ramifications for the world in that current moment that don't get touched on, which I think is kind of clever in a way, because there is an element to the movie where things are happening outside of this world of Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Lola Pettigrew. Like this mother and daughter, there are things that are happening in the world around them that is like apocalyptic. And it's something that is all on the periphery. And I think that that's a pretty clever way to just demonstrate that, you know, everything is on fire all around these people, and their drama, the drama that they are experiencing is singular to them. And I think that that's really clever. Now, the thing that's going on around them is, it's something that's far more interesting than the mother-daughter drama, I think, in my opinion. And B, it's something that I think is a much more interesting movie that's not touched on that much, but has been touched on in particular in a couple of animated shows, like in the 90s and early 2000s. It's like the exact premise of a couple episodes of certain shows, which is kind of funny to me. But anyway, it could have been more I would have been more interested in seeing that movie than what we got here. And by the end of the movie, like there's some weird things that happen that I won't go into detail. That is kind of a healing journey for the mother character and for really just for the mother. But then it all kind of leads to a point where it kind of feels not necessarily pandering, but it feels like we get to a point where, like, the denouement of the movie kind of comes down to a monologue from a character that's basically spelling out a little bit too much. Like, it's kind of dumbing down. It's too direct. It kind of would have been something nice to kind of, in terms of like an existential discussion, I kind of wish that it was a little bit more subtle than what we got, because it's literally like the most direct dialogue you can have with it. But that's a minor nitpick. But I don't know. I think the middle section of the movie where things pivot to where it becomes more focused on Tuesday and Zora, the mother and daughter. It becomes much more focused on their dynamic. And because of that, like that dynamic that occurs, and like the thing that brings it into like the second, like the middle point of the movie, like it's an interesting concept. And it's interesting the way that it's done, but it also just feels like it isn't as directly, I don't know. It didn't really speak too much to like the characters, which I think was a fumble. I think it would have been a little bit better to have it be more about the healing journey of the characters. Maybe it was, and I just didn't pick up on it. But when you have like this healing journey with these characters, and these characters coming to terms with what their life is and how it's going to drastically change for one of them, and how one is going to potentially die, those heavy concepts, when you have like a healing journey dealing with those heavy concepts, it feels a little bit underserved when the kind of denouement of those healing journeys is this conversation at the end of the movie that kind of just sums it up a little bit too directly for me. And it doesn't really feel like it's the product of big emotional strides that characters have gone through. Instead, it just feels more like the movie is summing up like its main point, its main thesis. And it's doing so in a way that's like, fine. We don't really need that summed up in that way. It's a good sentiment. It's honestly an existential thing that I've thought about tons, but I just kind of wish it was a little bit more subtle and a little bit cleaner in terms of delivering its message to the audience and to the characters. The visual effects of the bird are interesting. It's an interesting visual representation of this concept of death as it's personified in the most peculiar manner. There's a lot of like size differentiating in it. Like the movie opens with the bird, like a kind of a montage of the bird doling out death to people. It's a really interesting opening sequence, honestly. Like it's actually a really effective, interesting opening sequence. like there's a lot of different size variations. Like he's on like the eyelid of a person that's just died, like it's like that small, to the point where he's like standing in the middle of the street and is like 6 feet high. Just a lot of different range there. And it's interesting too that the movie, like the bird is interesting if a little bit underserved, but as a concept, the bird is really interesting because he goes to Tuesday, and she kind of distracts him from killing her. So that kind of causes them to strike up a little bit of a friendship thing, that becomes kind of a, not mentor-mentee relationship, but more of a kind of absentee parent sort of relationship in a way, or really a friendship blossoms between them. And the bird kind of helps push Tuesday toward, saying her piece with her mother and kind of making peace with her and expressing herself to her mother. A big issue that I had with the movie overall in that respect is I do feel like kind of similar to The Watchers. I kind of feel like Zora, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, there isn't a lot of context. There's not a lot of context or backstory given to really her or Tuesday. We know that Tuesday's sick because she's visibly sick. She has like an in-home nurse that helps day to day. She's clearly like reaching kind of toward the end stage of her life. At 15 years old, it's tragic. It's horrible. And the reaction or the way that Zora deals with that as the mother, the way that she deals with that is pretty interesting in a way that I haven't really seen in terms of how she handles it, how she internalizes it within her day-to-day life. There's some interesting stuff there. I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more depth to it, a little bit more detail to it. Like there's a scene in a store where she's haggling, and that is very much like it's the first step toward kind of showcasing what she's doing day to day in response to her daughter's failing health, and how she's reacting to it, how she is coping with it in whatever means that she could potentially cope with it. It's not a healthy way. It's not something that really is good or beneficial to their dynamic, but it's something that it's the way that she's coping with it. And that's really interesting. That's really solid in terms of showing us what it is or how she's doing and what she's doing and everything. But it also, I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more, because the contrast of that is that Tuesday, she has, health problems that she's very much, she needs constant care from this nurse and not her mother. And I just kind of wish that we got a little bit more context for Tuesday's illness, how that came about, like what her day-to-day life is like. We do get a taste of that, but I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more to that. So I don't know. I just kind of feel like the movie would have been better served with a little bit more detail. But again, that middle section where things kind of take a turn, where Tuesday and Zora basically team up in a unique way to do something, and like it's kind of condensed down to a montage effect that leads to this emotional climax, emotional catharsis for the characters that I didn't necessarily think was handled as well as it could have been. But I don't know. I kind of wish that there was a little bit more drama in that middle section. I wish that there was a little bit more conflict leading to that final conflict later in the movie. I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more there to further develop the strain between the characters. But I mean that, and then the last section of the movie is, despite that kind of monologue at the end, or that a little too direct, too clean of dialogue at the end, it's a pretty solid denouement. It's a decent way to kind of close the loop on the characterization and the drama of the movie. So I don't want to say too much else for fear of spoilers, but Tuesday I ended up rating it 2 stars, unfortunately, because I really wasn't as invested in it as this type of story usually invests me in. And I was ultimately pretty let down. So your mileage may vary. It is in theaters now, this weekend at least. If you're in Indy, it's playing at Keystone Art, Living Room Theaters, and a couple of Regal and AMC theaters in the area. So if you're keen to check it out. Let me know what you thought. It's Tuesday, and it is in theaters this weekend. And that is my non-spoiler review of A24's Tuesday. Not A24, but A24. Yeah, so I'm going to wind down the episode with a quick potpourri section because I am doing this solo and I feel like I have a little bit more time because the episode isn't as long as it usually is. So for potpourri, I only have a couple of things. So first, I want to talk about the Blue Angels documentary that's on Amazon Prime. It was in theaters. It's produced by J.J. Abrams and Glenn Powell. And it is just a documentary highlighting the Blue Angels. It was filmed for IMAX, so it was in theaters in IMAX. Unfortunately, I did not see it in theaters. I saw it on Prime, which it is currently streaming on Prime as a Prime original. With no ads, aside from like a minute and a half of ads up front. So the Blue Angels is it's a pretty straightforward documentary. To full disclosure, I didn't have my screener for Tuesday ready last night. So I had requested to get an extension on the screener. It's a whole thing. Basically, I was too busy with my new job to adhere to the screener window that I had, but fortunately, I was able to get an extension on the screener today, and I watched Tuesday before recording, so I was able to do that. But in the event that I wasn't going to be able to get an extension on the screener in time, because I still wanted to get this episode posted on Thursday, I watched last night the Blue Angels documentary with the intention of like, if I don't have time, I can just use that as the secondary review. So that's the backstory for the Blue Angels. Fortunately, I got the screener extension for Tuesday because there's not much to talk about with the Blue Angels documentary. It is very much a cookie cutter, pretty straightforward documentary about just like the process of the Blue Angels, the practice, the danger presented in it. It's very much like a fluffy puff piece thing. I saw on Letterboxd a lot of people saying like, oh, it's military propaganda. And to an extent it is, but it's also like, hey, there are these this cool set of 6 pilots that do aerial acrobatics and aerial tricks and everything every year on a tour. And like, yes, it's propaganda to for military recruiting and everything, but so is Top Gun. Like, it's just, that's what it is. That's the world we live in. And it's really cool to see these fighter jets performing stunts and tricks and everything. And so to get kind of an inside look in the process of it was pretty satisfying. It's very much kind of a no nonsense sort of documentary. There's not a lot of emphasis on the history or the process necessarily of being selected to be one of the Blue Angels. There's not a lot of backstory. They touch on the backstory a little bit, but overall it's just like, oh, look at these cool fighter jets in the air, which is one of the reasons why I kind of lament not seeing it in theaters, because I do feel like this would have been really cool to see in IMAX in the theater. But unfortunately, I didn't see it that way. But I mean, it's a well-made, competently made documentary. And I did have one thought that this is such a dumb thought. So feel free to turn off the episode now. But I kept thinking throughout the documentary, I kept thinking, I really want to see like a Red Dawn-esque cheesy military action movie, or like Olympus Has Fallen, or something to that degree, where it's just about the Blue Angels being like the only fighter pilots in the country who's able to fight off an invading force in the country, in the US. I would just love to see like a super cheesy, jingoistic military action movie that has the Blue Angels performing all of these stunts as they're taking down bad guys and dogfights and stuff. I think that would be really fun. I think that would be really fun, cheesy action movie. So make it happen, Hollywood. Glenn Powell, if you're listening, make it happen. If you feel it, chase it. I said, if you could feel it, chase it. I'm so excited for Twisters, you guys. I'm so pumped. And honestly, like I said with Hitman, I think I said that I reviewed Hitman, didn't I? Yes, I reviewed it with Brent last week. My days are all mixed up and messed up, but Glenn Powell's a freaking movie star, you guys. Like he's incredible. So I can't wait for Twisters. But the Blue Angels was good. I do want to see that action movie, cheesy action movie that I pitched. So Hollywood, make it happen. And the other thing I'm going to say for Potpourri, this will probably be brief. Fortunately, it's not going to be about 24, which I finished watching season 8. It's going to be about another show that I watched in my youth that I really adored and am revisiting now, and that is How I Met Your Mother. And of course, longtime listeners will know that we were very distraught as a podcast collective, as the obsessive viewer lore is that 10 years ago, myself, Tiny, and Mike were ready to review a celebration, or do a celebration recording after the series finale of How I Met Your Mother, and the series finale was so dreadfully bad and disappointing and a slap in the face to everyone that was a fan of that show, that we ended up with a long episode of just griping about it, a therapy session about like, why did this show fumble the ending so hard? So I say all of that because now 10 years later, I'm rewatching it. It's interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that I'm watching it now in my late 30s as I'm about to turn 38. And it's like, I don't know, there was some, watching it in my mid to late 20s, there was a romanticized nature to it that's like, oh yeah, I've got my youth. I'm like, I go out drinking with friends and get up to a bunch of shenanigans, not necessarily exactly like How I Met Your Mother, but I like to get drunk and hang out with friends and everything. Now in my late 30s, I'm like, okay, this is so far beyond me. Like I can't drink a beer without getting a headache immediately afterwards. So it's just interesting to see where I'm at now versus where I was then. But that's not the main thing I want to talk about. The main thing I want to talk about, and this is going to be this is going to be a direct spoiler for How I Met Your Mother. So, it's something that I just kind of can't get out of my head since I saw it on TikTok. So fair warning, I'm going to be spoiling the ending of How I Met Your Mother. It was 10 years ago, so I'm giving you enough leeway to not listen to this part of it, but I am about to spoil the ending of How I Met Your Mother. Here we go. The ending of How I Met Your Mother revealed that the mother in question was dead the entire time, and the entire point of Ted telling his son and daughter the story of how he met their mother was to basically allow them to give him the go-ahead to pursue Robin, because that's the true love of his life. And the show ends with him getting back together with Robin in the future. Terrible ending. Terrible, shitty ending, because it also had to basically retroactively change the character development of Barney in the lead up to that ending to fit that. Basically, what it came down to, the issue with How I Met Your Mother as a television series was that the creators, Carter Bays and Craig Thomas, they had this idea from at least season 2 to lead to the point where they were going to reveal that the mother was dead and Robin was like was Ted's like true love, and he was going to get back together with her. That was in season 2. In the intervening years, 2 things happened. One, the characters grew into different characters, whereas like Barney and Robin ended up getting married, and by the end of the series, they had to get divorced so that Robin would be available for Ted. At the end of the series. So they undid so much character development, and the characters went into such different directions that when the plan from the original, or at least from season 2, had to be implemented, there was like it was done poorly because the characters were not the characters they were in season 2. So it didn't fit that way. The other thing that happened is that since they had to film all of the B-roll footage of the kids at the time, they had a bunch of reaction shots, a bunch of scripted scenes with the kids that all led toward that ending from season 2. So they had to use that. They couldn't work around that. And the reason that I'm bringing all of this up, first of all, I will say the show's fine. The show's entertaining. I still enjoy it. I do think that it's a little bit rusty in terms of the characters or the actors' chemistry. I kind of feel like, at least in those early seasons, it really feels like they are just coworkers. They're not friends in real life. There's not like that sitcom camaraderie that comes up and everything. It just feels like there's a little bit weak chemistry. But the thing that I'm bringing up, the reason why I'm being so long-winded about this, is that I saw a TikTok that basically ran down this entire thing that I just said, the reason why the ending failed so badly. And I saw a comment that blew my mind and really like, in 10 years, granted, I haven't thought that much about How I Met Your Mother, but in 10 years, I had never considered this being a way that they could have ended it. And I blame Carter Bays and Craig Thomas for fumbling it so much because they were so married to that ending that they had in mind in season 2. So the comment I saw was that, you know, they had all of this footage of the kids that they had to basically lead to for the future Ted segments at the end of the show. They had to use that. The comment I saw said they didn't even have to do that, because what they could have done is they could have brought the kids back as like 8-9 years older and pushed like the end of the series, like the future segments, the future Ted segments, as like 8 or 9 years in the future from 2030 when he started telling the story, and have the kids say, "Dad, we know the story. You tell us the story every like couple of years." And like, why not do that? Like, why not do that? Why not just have that be the ending where it's like, yeah, that's how you met Mom. You know, we've seen this, like, this, you know, you've seen this, you've told us this so many times over the years. Like, why not do a time jump at the end and then even have them talk about their kids? I don't know. I don't know. I needed to get that off of my chest because I feel like that could have been such a perfect-ish ending to that show. And I blame the creators of the show for being way too married to this vision that they had from the outset and not taking into account that the characters grew and moved and became different characters by the end. So I don't know. But having said all that, I am on season 3 of How I Met Your Mother. Season 3 is the season that basically is marred by the writer's strike in 2007. So it's a little bit muddled there. It's also a little bit of a lesser season because at least it's front loaded with Ted being like single again, and like it's like a 2 Barney sort of thing. Like he's just being like Barney and Barney's being like Barney, and it's a little bit too much like Barney. So anyway, that's my check-in with How I Met Your Mother. I'm sure I will talk in the weeks to come about future stuff with How I Met Your Mother. But that's all I've got for Potpourri, and that is it for this week's episode of The Obsessive Viewer. As always, thank you so much for listening, and make sure to follow the show on social media and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast app. Also, check out Obsessive Viewer Podcast's other shows, including Tower Junkies, a Stephen King podcast, hosted by Tiny and myself, and Anthology, The Twilight Zone, and Classic Sci-Fi Podcast, hosted by me. I'm going to start playing myself out next week on the show. I am planning on covering Bad Boys Ride or Die, and a secondary review will be for MoviePass MovieCrash, which is streaming on Max right now. But we'll see if those are the reviews next week. I tend to change up the reviews, so we'll see. But thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. And now, enjoy this short clip from a recent Patreon exclusive episode. For the full episode and more Patreon exclusive content, sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Fictionalized autobiographical story. That is my headcanon for Two Talented Bastards. Completely joking, obviously, but what if? What if? That's all I'll say. So that's Two Talented Bastards. I love saying the title out loud. It's a lot of fun. And I really love it. I think it's a very good, strong story to start the collection on. It's got that subtext to it that it's an interesting spin on what King has done numerous times throughout his career, is explore the nature of creativity, the nature of talent, and most notably the talent that he knows, writers. He knows that intimately because he is a writer. He is someone who has done this for the majority of his life. Thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our episodes, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on this show, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, visit obsessiveviewer.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and grow our community. If you want to support the show and get early access to new episodes, as well as a steady stream of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. For information on more podcasts presented by obsessiveviewer.com, visit obsessiveviewer.com/podcasts. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
See this episode's show notes for our unique promo code to get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn when you sign up for a new account. Get your show on Apple and Spotify, get helpful stats, and all the support you need to sound your very best.